Yep, I'm in. So I'll close my other one.
Oh, there it is.
I think that the setting was set to unlisted instead of public, and that was the problem. So we have to make sure that it's always set to public. We already had the prayer, so we don't have Garrett yet. Did we lose him?
We don't have Garrett yet.
Here.
No, I can't see you, Garrett.
All right, Steve, go ahead and get things up so that you can be ready to share what you need to.
Should I close that one then?
Yeah. That's what we're in.
That one and that one.
I'm only in one call.
All right. There we go. All right, let me go ahead and pull up.
Yeah, we can see you now.
Okay, so this week's case study had to do with Tom Green, and just a synopsis. Basically, Tom was recruited by a headhunter, came into this company, really wanted to show them what he had, and he really was aspiring to move up the ladder very quickly. Had some really good sales, and was impressed. Management was impressed by his attitude and by how well he was doing, and sounds like they kind of took a chance on him and promoted him up to a senior position. But unfortunately, he's having some problems adapting to the tasks that he's given, and it seems like also the office politics or the environment that he's in. So I'll go ahead and open it up and ask, what do you guys see was the biggest issue in this case? The biggest problem?
Lack of trust.
I think one of the biggest problems was that they took a chance on something that became a really big problem and created more problems. I realize in business that you take chances on things and that some of them go well and some of them don't. But they fully knew that this guy didn't have the experience that he needed to do this specific job, and they did it anyway.
Yeah, well, that's exactly correct. They knew it to begin with. Was that Garrett that was?
It was. We lost him. He was on the old chat. I'll try and
Okay.
get him back. You guys just
One of the things that they talked about is that the person who, I guess, hired him was the vice president, and she even brought it up and said, hey, you don't have the management experience, so what are you going to do to compensate? So they already knew that there was a problem to begin with, but she went ahead and did it anyways. So, you know, I guess when those types of red flags get thrown up, then as a company, you really should look at what it is that you're doing. I think also one of the things is there was a lack of communication between her and the person that would end up being his boss. He didn't have really any say in regards to who was being hired. You know, she even stated that if he had that opportunity, it wouldn't have been him.
Yeah.
They started off on the wrong footing, and there was no trust or respect at the offset, and it went downhill from there. They never even engaged in. There was no expectations talked about for the position. I mean, they never even had a conversation about what the expectations were and agreed upon anything.
Exactly.
Right. I agree that, you know, when you don't have clear expectations, you can't expect somebody to meet those expectations. And, you know, he was just kind of put in there, and he didn't have anybody meet with him about his progress for a month. And that's really too long to not have met with somebody for a month. And my thought was that, let me get the name straight. Davis was the guy that had the job before, right?
Yes, Frank Davis.
Okay. So Davis is looking at the old position saying, it has to be done this way. And Green is looking at his new position saying, well, this is how I want to do it. And Davis doesn't even have training probably on his position that he's in now, or at least training on how to manage the team and the system that they have, or the lack thereof. So that's a big challenge.
One of the things I think they could do as a company is provide a mentor for Tom, so that he has at least someone that can shadow him, or they can, someone that he can work with, so that they can give him some feedback along the way to let him know, these are some of the things that that you can improve on, or these are some of the things that would work better. Because it seems to me that he's still stuck in that sales mindset, and he just wants to get out there and do the sales, but doesn't really want to worry about all of the administrative stuff that needs to be done. And I don't know as though anyone really sat down with them and said, hey, look, you're not exactly in sales anymore. I mean, you are, but you're not. You need to be working with your sales reps to have them have the training to go out and do the sales. And then he needs to be focusing more on the administrative side as well.
Well, I like the information that we had read from Covey last week or something, maybe the week before. I was reading, and it was talking about delegation and how he had delegated with his family. He's got his wife, and he only have so much time that they can do. But when they sit down and they break down the tasks, they can take something that would have taken them, 10 hours, and they can delegate it within 1 hour, and then that's done. And I think that in management positions, it's important to be able to delegate and be able to, let the people that you delegated to kind of sink or swim with their delegation as well. And so that they feel like they have the responsibility with that. This morning with my daughter, I was trying to get her to help correct some of her schoolwork, because it's just a lot for me to correct, and she's not going to be dishonest about it. So, you need to correct your math. And she just didn't want to do it. And it was get working on it. And finally I said, okay, we're watching this show. How many things of math do you want to have corrected before the show's over? And she's like, oh, I'm on 7. I was going to go to 10. I said, okay, great. And you know what? I didn't say another word, and she got it all the way done. So I think when you delegate properly, it makes it easier to not have contention as well.
For me, I felt like Shannon did provide the information he needed. She kind of warned him what this position was about. But ultimately, I think this comes down to a miscommunication. For me, the book Crucial Conversations was like a perfect fit for this particular case study. I honestly believe that if Thomas actually went up to Frank when he started feeling that Frank was trying to set him up to get fired, honestly, just he told Frank, hey, here's what I'm observing. I'm observing that, I know you wanted to choose the person who wanted to be hired. I know that you wanted, I know that you're kind of micromanaging me. I see that you're doing this. You're saying this, that I'm not doing my job well. You're reporting me to Shannon, I think her name was. All these observations, and then just let Frank know, hey, I feel like you're setting me up to get rid of me. I don't think you'd want to do that, or that's your intention, but that's how it seems. From there, I believe that creates that safe environment that we talked about last week, where then, Frank can kind of say, oh no, I didn't mean you to feel that way. I'm trying to mentor you. I'm trying to give you that training, that insight that you need to be successful in this job. So for me, I think this was just a miscommunication where they didn't take the time to sit down with each other and just say, hey, here's what I'm observing. This is what I'm feeling. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that that's a good idea for him to kind of go in and sit down. I think that there's some words that you had, and I know that you're just throwing it out there, but there's some words in there that could be triggers. Like if you tell somebody that they're micromanaging you, that's going to be a trigger for almost everybody. And so you have to be really careful with the way that you say it, something more like, hey, I can tell that we don't have a good system worked out here for our balance between management. You know, can we figure out a better way to balance our management? And that way, you know, because that's really what he wants, right? He wants balance. And, you know, one of the things that I was talking about in my paper this week was just getting to the emotion that's behind everything, and what's the whole thing behind it and the underlying things. And I think that, you know, balancing things out is a big deal. That's my opinion.
And when you do it like that, the way that Chantel said, when you approach things and make sure that your words are what you intend. Like when you say micromanage, you might not specifically mean micromanage. You might be saying that out of emotion. But I think that if you do say, like she said, that in like a using your words correctly, that when they do ask you, or when you do delegate or being delegated for something, it's going to be a lot easier because you feel like there's something in it for both of you, and that it's not just a one-sided thing.
Sure. What I probably should have said is, like, when Thomas talks to Frank, he should start out with the facts, the things that he's observing. And you're right. I mean, he has to choose his words carefully. So that's why it's good to start out with the facts and say, hey, this is what I'm observing, A, B, C, D, and this is why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I would love to see what your input is, because in my opinion, maybe I just misread this whole thing. To me, Thomas Green, he's young, he's a little bit selfish, he wants to do things his way, and he was able to do that as a salesperson. He hasn't really been properly trained for this particular job, and he feels like there's nobody in the company supporting him, as we found out toward the end of the case study. I honestly feel that I don't feel Frank Davis was trying to like throw him under the bus or anything. I just feel that there was that miscommunication where he's just like, I want to do things my way. Frank wants me to do it his way. He must be upset at me because he didn't get to choose me. And I just feel like they just need to sit down and just really have that crucial conversation, so to speak. As far as delegation goes, I think that would have been a great idea. There's a lot of things that Frank wanted from Thomas that I believe Thomas could delegate it to some of the sales reps to kind of help them take off some of the load. Because as we talked about, he had all this pressure. He's got a girlfriend. He's moving into a new area. So I think the delegation would have been a key asset as well.
Yeah,
I think the delegation definitely would have been a good thing. You know, and from Tom's perspective, you know, one of the things that would have been really good for him would be to step up and just say, okay, these are the issues that you're seeing. So what can we do to make these better? And then he works with Frank to set some goals to improve on those particular issues. And that way, I think if he does that, he'll build a better relationship with Frank. And like it talks about later on in the case, he essentially just avoids them, because he figures if he avoids them, then there isn't going to be any more issues. And so all that did is just create more communication issues.
That's where his kind of came in right there, that inexperience, that he just doesn't know. He was never nurtured for this position. He was a great salesperson. He basically sold himself into that position. He was able to sell on it. So I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Michelle, did you have something to say?
I did. I think, so going back to the building effective one-on-one work relationships that we also read, I think they need to go back to the balance and approach and inquiry. I think you're on something there, Steve, but I think also that Tom could go to Frank and say, you know, these are my ideas, and he could pitch them. And then he could say, so what do you think of them? Or, you know, how do they sound? What do you think? What will work? What won't work? I mean, that way they can start a dialogue, and then they can reduce some of that conflict. And, you know, maybe then Frank can pitch what he thinks. And you know what? From there, they can ask those positive questions that says, you know, how do you think that is? Or give me some ideas on, you know, how that won't work or how it could work. Or, you know, I think they need to go about it that way instead of, you know, these are my issues. I feel you're coming at, you know, more negatively, make it more positive.
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely need to turn it around and do it to a positive situation. Otherwise, you know, as I talked about later in the case, he's saying, well, maybe I just need to go and look for another job. So he's ready to just walk away. But what he really needs to do is try and salvage this position, because he could be great in the company and he could get what he wants. He could continue to move up the ladder. He would need to make, he'd have to be there a while. He'd probably have to be there at least a good 20 years before he could really move up. But he would then be getting the experience that he needs. So I think that's definitely a really big thing that needs to happen. Let's move on to the next point. So let's just say you're Shannon McDonald and you've hired would you hire Thomas? So this is before it's all happened. You knowing that he has some issues where he doesn't have management experience, but he is great in sales and he has fresh new ideas, which is kind of like what she was looking for, but with those red flags of not having the management experience. Would you hire him? And if you would, why would you or why wouldn't you?
I would say no. And the reason why I wouldn't hire him yet is I would want him to go through kind of like what we talked about, like a mentor type of program, like where you can shadow somebody for a few months if he is actually a good fit. I feel like this was a premature move, and it might be because they need to fill that position quickly. But I feel that if I was Shannon, if I was going to put a candidate in that position, I would want them to, I'd want to see if they truly were qualified. I want to see, can he shadow somebody? Can he kind of do some of the work and just kind of see what the job really entails to get a better idea if he's a good fit. So I would not have hired him as quickly as Shannon did.
Okay.
My initial thought, when someone says that they're going to take a chance on you, I feel like that's like in itself, like a challenge. Instead of saying, like, I think it was McDonald that said, I'm going to take a chance on you, and she hired him. Instead, I feel like those words are scary with a hothead who's like wanting to take over a position in the company. I think the words described in that are maybe part of the problem. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think that's a big thing, because you just kind of challenge this guy to go out and go crazy in your company, and he has no idea what he's doing.
Yep, that's very true. Chantal, can you take it for a minute? I need to grab my charger. My computer's gonna die.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle.
I would have hired him. I think I would have set out clear expectations and ground rules. I think that was what was lacking from the start. I think maybe he has fresh ideas which could help grow the company, because obviously the company wasn't looking at some of the things that he was looking at or wanting to grow, or the issues of concerns that he had. And I think just because someone maybe doesn't have the managerial experience doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the capabilities to learn. But I think he needed to be mentored, and maybe she needed to mentor him and really stick with him like on a regular basis until he actually understood the whole process. And I think they also needed team norms, because I think that was part of an issue in that one meeting.
Yeah.
And they needed to really do some bonding as a team. And I don't think that nothing was really set up for him to have success. There wasn't any. I think Shannon kind of set him up for his lack of failure in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think so. And when you have that kind of a situation that you're going into, it made everybody uncomfortable. The way the situation was set to start with, I think everybody was uncomfortable with it. I probably would have hired him, but through like a fast track to management position. That's something that you see a lot in companies now, that they'll have a fast track manager position and people can get on and, and, have those skills gained within a shorter amount of time than what you would typically have. So I think that would have been really helpful. I wanted to acknowledge, I see that we have Brother Lamphere here. Is that how you say your name?
Yes.
Okay, very
Hi.
good. Very good.
It's good to be with you.
It's good to have you with us.
Welcome.
Congratulations again to Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Are you getting any sleep, by the way?
The first couple nights, no. Yes.
Yeah, that'll be first couple years. No.
Yeah, he's got his days and nights mixed up. So.
Yep, that happens.
All right. So
Okay.
did you guys go?
Yeah. So we can talk about Frank Davis, describing him right now.
Yes.
And what does he value?
So Frank Davis, what are some of the things that you think he values, and what are some of the things that you see that he has a goal? Like, what is his end goal?
I think that he values being able to have hard data, like facts backed by data. And you know, he has experience in the business and with working with people, and I think that that's essential, that they have, you know, you have to be able to show your data and show where it's coming from instead of just saying it. You know, it doesn't work if you just say it.
Yeah, he's definitely a very numbers driven person. You can tell by the graphs that he's asking for, the different reports he's asking for, whereas Tom's just like, I don't need those. He's like, I've got it all in his head. He doesn't, why does he need all that information? And again, that goes back to the sales mindset and not the management mindset. But I think that he definitely values the numbers and values organization.
I think it's interesting that you said sales versus management mindset. I have to laugh at this. I'm constantly asking Steve if he's written the stuff down. I'm constantly like, here's a notepad, here's paper, write this down. I'm good. I've got it in my head all the time. And so apparently I've got the management position here, which we already knew. And he's got the sales position, and learning to write things down, it is hard. It is hard to take that time to say, I have to get this on paper. But if you don't have that stuff, then you know your business is a mess, and it shows in lots of different ways. So
one of the downsides of having your spouse in your class is things that get brought out.
You get told on a lot.
That's right.
I'd have to say one of the other things he probably values is accountability. And I think that's something that Thomas is used to. He has these things that he wants to be aware of where Thomas is. Basically, it's just being accountable and getting back in touch with Frank when Frank wants to be responded to. So I think that was another issue that Thomas had.
Well, that goes back to a lot of different things throughout if there's no expectation set, like Michelle said, they didn't even really have much of a conversation. If there's no expectation set from McDonald to Green and none from Davis to Green, Davis, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it just goes back to a lot of different things, that there's not going to be much of an expectation set, or it's not going to work, and that's kind of what we saw.
But didn't Davis lay down those expectations? Like he was trying to mentor Green, from what I got out of this, especially during that first one-on-one. He was laying down, he's like, okay, you tried it your way, here's what I don't like, but here's the way I want you to do. I want you to have graphs. I want you to let me know where you are, update your calendar. I think it came late in the game, which I think was the point that you were making. But I think ultimately Davis was trying to be a mentor to Thomas. But I think Thomas took it as more of a threatening, like, oh, he's trying to control me.
Yeah, I guess my point was that not that he didn't try, but that it was not set from the beginning is
okay.
What I meant.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't clearly lined out either, I don't think.
Right.
I think Frank might have a hard time with change, or maybe he has a hard time because he didn't pick Davis to be on his team, and he kind of just got him because Shannon, chose him. So I think that's kind of one of his issues he's dealing with too, because he didn't have a say in who was hired, possibly.
Yeah, I think that could be a big deal as well, especially if he had somebody that he knew was going to do, what in his mind he thought would do a great job. That's a problem. But I think that, Shannon made it pretty clear that she had a different direction, that she wanted things to go a little bit, and she wanted new ideas in there. And, that's, I think, where it came in.
What's interesting, though, is it seems like when the emails are being sent to Shannon, her response to Tom is So what do you have to say to this? It seems kind of like she's picking sides at that point, and he thought she was going to be on her side the whole time, and then all of a sudden it comes down to it, and he then has to answer for all of his choices that he made, and it doesn't appear as though she's there to back him up, to say, hey, I wanted some new fresh ideas, and this is what he's giving you.
Right. I think, go ahead.
Make a comment?
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe go a little further with Michelle's suggestion that this whole thing started with McDonald not including Frank in this hiring decision.
You wanted me to?
So another way to ask that, if she had included Frank in this hiring decision, how much of this stuff that we're now talking about would have happened? I know that's a conjecture, but if Frank had been involved from the get-go on this, what would have been the impact on this whole thing?
I think most of it wouldn't have happened, because when you have a membership team that has a decision together, then you're gonna have that decision unified, and he could at least see why she wanted him to come in, and then they could have had the conversation of, okay, well, these are his strengths, this is what he's going to need to build, so how do we help him build that? And that would have been a really needed conversation. I think that the whole thing would have been avoided if she hadn't prematurely hired him and sidestepped company protocol. And I think the clearer steps for company protocol need to be written down. But I also think that there's like an underlying dysfunction of their system here. Before we were in business major, I was taking marriage and family studies classes, and one of the things they talked about was like systems theory, and basically how in any group, that you have a system at play, and that system can be functional or dysfunctional, but that's kind of what runs the whole thing. And I really see that here, that this system is a dysfunctional system, that, you know, they've got, it was at first just Shannon and just Thomas. And so they made their plan, and then it's like they kind of pulled in Davis over here a little bit. And so then now it's just Davis and Thomas for quite a while. And then every time there's a problem, then Davis is like, oh, let's pull Shannon back in here and try and diffuse the problem. And I think that the dysfunction is that they weren't having ownership of their own responsibilities, and that they weren't respecting each other's positions of what they needed to do in the company.
Yeah, I agree. Davis is like the expert in that position that Thomas just took over. He succeeded in that position, which is one of the reasons why he got the promotion. So having Frank Davis's words of wisdom when working with Shannon to see if Thomas Green would be a good fit, I think Frank would have been able to ask better questions. I think Frank, since he knows what it takes to be successful in that position, would have been able to have a better idea if Thomas would have been a good fit right there. And if the decision was to hire Thomas, I think Frank would have had more buy-in. He would have had more invested in it, and he would have been more likely to get some kind of mentoring program started for him right from the bat.
Right.
Well, I think by having the buy-in, he would have wanted him to succeed and success, because Tom failing at this point isn't on him, it's mainly on Shannon. I mean, he could be looking at it that way, because Frank had no buy-in and no say in the situation. So if she would have brought him in at the ground floor and said, hey, we need to fill the spot. This is what I'm thinking, let's talk about it. And let's, we interview him. These are our issues. We know we need to support him in this. How are we going to do that? And have a plan. Then from there, you could at least talk with Tom, show him the expectations. These are Frank's expectations. These are the job expectations. And then, everyone would have been on a same page to begin with.
It's true.
100% agree.
So looking at it from Tom's side, what does it seem like he values in this?
Freedom.
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
Did you say freedom, Mark?
No, I didn't say anything.
Well, I said freedom. He
Okay, yeah.
doesn't want to be tethered down. He doesn't want somebody looking over his shoulders. He wants to be able to do things his way and try those that way out. I feel like he feels that Frank is putting him in a box, and he doesn't have that creative freedom that he did as a salesperson. So I think freedom, autonomy, I think those are two very important things for him.
I think that part of it's because he's young and cocky. Like he's
Exactly.
you know, like, okay, well, I should be able to do this. I know what I'm doing. And, you know, he almost still has that teenager mentality, and he just took it and transferred it to the workplace of, I'm going to show you that I know everything. And I think it's very common in, you know, younger people, and especially, you know, early to mid 20s, depending on what kind of chances for maturity they've had. You know, I think in the church, we have a lot more chance for maturity when we serve missions and those kinds of things. So we don't have as many of those problems. But I think that that he was very cocky, and so he values his own opinion. You know, he values that I guess the pride that he has, that he wants to show that he can do everything.
Yeah, promotion. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I had seen is it seems like he's trying to make up for his lack of management skills by just doing what he's good at. He's good at sales, and so he wants to get out there and he wants to continue to do that. And I think he's trying to use that as a way to fill in for his lack of management skills that he has. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but
yeah. Well, I think he likes the sales part, and I think that's why that's his strength. So that's what he played to. Instead of developing his manager skills, he needed to balance that out, and that's what's kind of lacking.
Yeah.
Is he still wanted to do that sales role heavily, and not so much the managerial part.
I think that it goes back to the training again, but if somebody were to sit with him and say, you know, it's really awesome when you train and you work with somebody that's doing sales, and then you see them make the sale, and you can get more excited for them having made that sale than you do for yourself, because you see that the work went into it, and you see their development, and you know, help him understand that, you know, his job is about developing people and developing helping them develop skills. And but, you know, that's a conversation that would have been needed to be had, I think.
it almost seems like he likes being out in front. He likes to be front and center. Because in the case, it talked about how he was with one of the sales reps, and the sales rep was basically saying, yeah, he did a great job. He really sold them on the product, but they wanted to see some numbers. They wanted to basically be convinced as to why it was going to work for them financially. But it seems like he just kind of wanted to go in there and show them exactly how things were done. And I can imagine him basically coming in and just taking over everything, and his poor salesperson is just standing in the background feeling a little left out.
I can't hear that.
Who is that?
Who's speaking?
I'm not speaking.
Brother Lamphere, were you speaking?
No. You got a ghost.
I guess we do. Well, hopefully our ghosts can hear us and go away. It's none of our kids. They're out in the living room, theoretically. Where were we at?
So we were talking about Tom kind of being front and center, and like
the
I
other
can just
guy,
kind of
yeah.
imagine him jumping in and pushing the sales rep to the back and taking over. That just seems like the type of personality that he has. And that's part of what makes me think he just wasn't ready for the role. He wasn't ready to be put into management. He needs to continue to use that sales energy that he has and go out and sell until he has the maturity to be in the position that he's currently in.
Yeah. Yeah, the guy that was talking about him says he's great when he's with the clients on his ideas. He's very charismatic, and can think quickly on his feet. I can tell he's put a lot of thought into his strategies, and I really like working with him. However, the clients are starting to ask me for hard data to back his claims of cost savings. They are also requiring memos and presentations to bring to their superiors to justify the expenditure. Thomas doesn't really work that way. He would rather talk through the issues face to face.
Well, and I think that's where his lack of management comes in, is he's supposed to be providing those, excuse me, those hard numbers to his sales reps. And because he's not fulfilling that position correctly, there are no numbers to provide.
You almost wonder if he got done with school and his degree, and he was just so happy to be done that he thought, I'm never writing another report again.
It's also really easy to be, maybe I'm jumping to a conclusion here, but it's also really easy to be unethical when you don't want to show anyone the numbers. You can, and I don't mean that in like, it's just an assumption here, but I mean, I just think of a schmoozer that doesn't want to show anyone the hard data. Like, oh, it's fine, it's good enough. But what's good enough? You need to be able to back up your claims. So I think
it's like a car lot that won't put the prices on the windows of the cars because it's a different price for everybody that comes in there.
Right.
Same idea.
Well, or like right now, we're in the process. I'm trying to buy a truck, and finding that I go online and find these prices, but then when I call them, they say, "Oh no, that price isn't correct." Well, so what it is really is it's a price to get you to contact them, but then once you've contacted them, then they try and hook you in. It's the same type of thing. They're just, not being honest, not showing things, right up at the front. How do you think office politics are playing into this?
I think it's just a giant power struggle. And every time there's anxiety, they pull somebody else in to try and diffuse the anxiety. What do you guys think?
I think when McDonald hired him, it was like a total power trip. She just like really liked this guy. He was good at what he did, and she just was gonna like make it work regardless of the circumstances. And I think that shows. And like I said at the beginning, that she's just like, I'm just gonna take a chance on you.
Right. I'm the VP, and I can make whatever choice I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It even says in here that she and says Shannon McDonald and the division vice president. She's the division vice president, and Mary Jacobs, the national sales director, made a concerted effort to get to know him better. Him being Tom. So they're like, well, we want to, it was almost like they were targeting him to move him forward as well. And that can be very political.
Maybe there's some HR issues going on that will playing into it. Maybe she liked him because he was young and he just had that energy that I think she thought Frank just didn't have anymore.
Yeah. I think it just between the key.
Well, I think some of the team, some of the office people liked him and liked some of his ideas. So I don't know that all of them, were against him or didn't think Shannon should put him in that role. So I think that first team meeting where they were all present, I think that greatly set the stage for everything, where he openly challenged Frank in the meeting and was negative. I think that just set the stage for everything to fall apart from there.
It even talks about in the case how he spoke with other managers outside of his own department, and they just said, stick to your guns, basically, don't let it go. And so now it's almost like he's in the company and he's saying, okay, who's going to be on my side? And it's going to be me against Frank, and let's see how many people I can bring with me to this fight.
Right. Well, he had no business talking to the other people in the office about it. That should have been, I guess that if you want to talk to somebody in the office about a problem, you could say, hey, I'm having a challenge with my work in this area. What are you doing in your area? What works for you? Mm-hmm. Then he's looking for solutions. But when you're just standing around complaining, then that's not the way that you want to be.
Well, it doesn't show that you have good management skills, and that shows right there that you're not mature enough for the position you're in.
Right. Well,
but wait a minute. Again, Frank could have gone to Tom after the meeting and said, "Hey, You didn't like my performer numbers. Let's talk about it. Let me hear why you don't think those are accurate. And then, you know what? Follow it up with some data. Let me see some data on that. Or, you know, how do you get to there? I mean, because Frank didn't help the situation either, because he was upset about it. And instead of talking to Tom privately afterwards and say, hey, you know, that kind of bothered me. Let's talk about this and let's try to resolve it. But he didn't do his part as a senior management. I mean, honestly, so he's just as much as fault as Tom.
Pride issue.
Yeah. Well, what he did instead is he kind of created that triangle thing again, you know, and that's kind of back to the idea of the struggles, the power struggles that were going on. But in that theory with the systems and stuff, basically, if you have two people that are struggling and one person wants that struggle to diminish or end, they involve a third person. And so Davis goes to McDonald and says, Tom's negative attitude is not what we need on this team. Corporate expects this division to be a growth power company and, you know, all these other things. So he's pulling somebody else in and expressing his anxieties about it. And so I think that really what needs to happen is that McDonald needs to learn how to manage this better and how to be able to say, okay, I can see that you can have a concern about that. How do you think you want to address that with him? And let him come out and say, okay, well, I could address it this way or that way. You know, that one of the best management styles is to just keep asking questions, not obnoxious questions or like, you know, hard data questions, but to build interpersonal skills, you can ask questions and get a lot more out of the situation than otherwise.
That goes back to the balance and inquiry approach in the handout we have.
Yeah.
You know, asking the right questions and saying, you know, what do you believe the purpose is of that? Or what data are your conclusions based on? That would have been a perfect question to ask Tom. So if you don't, you know, my numbers are this, you know, what data do you have?
Right.
To back up, you know, the disagreement or vice versa. So.
Yeah.
Our daughter regularly comes home from school with some kind of a conflict that she's had with somebody. She's not a fighting type person, but she's very opinionated and she's really, really smart. And so she's always like, oh, this person is here or there. And almost always I just listen. I'm like, okay. And then she gets done finally. And I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do about that? What do you think is a good course of action with that? And you know, start talking her through those processes of where she wants that relationship to be headed and how she wants it to change. So that's my thought.
I think that's a great way to asking questions to get the person to take not only accountability, but actually to get buy-in. Because if you keep on asking them questions, well, how would you manage this? Or what outcome are you looking for? Now they're coming up with the answers. And as they come up with the answers, they almost feel like, oh, this is my idea. This is my way of doing it. And so they have that ownership. And I think that's a great way I can even think about as far as management technique. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It's really good with kids, I promise.
Well, and as a manager, you know, as you ask questions, you can even kind of steer the person in the way that you want them to go, but at the same time, also helping them to come up with ideas. They may be the ideas that you want them to come up with, but helping them to see that it was their idea. So you kind of get their buy-in at the same time. And that way you're getting what you want. You're getting them to go in the right direction. You've gotten their buy-in on it, and then you can move forward.
They're coming up to the conclusion themselves. And I think that's the important part. They're coming up to the conclusion themselves, even though by your questions, you're kind of gearing them into that direction. But
yeah, you have to be careful with that. You have to be careful with that though, because instead of using the commitment pattern, you're using the manipulation pattern. You know, you're going from, you know, okay, let's make commitments, let's that kind of stuff, and you're gearing them to, okay, well, let's, you know, well, what if you painted the wall a different color? Well, what other colors you like? Oh, you like red? Yeah, I like reds too. You know, and you can keep steering the conversation to a totally different thing, and before you know it, it's gone from painting the color was white to color is purple or something. You know, like there's just a lot of change that can happen with a conversation if it's too much. So you have to make sure that your questions have a valid purpose and that you're not trying to manipulate it with that with those questions.
Yep, I definitely would agree. So let's talk about their conflict styles. One thing I can see with Tom, his conflict style seems to be more of the avoidance. At this point, he is just kind of like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and he's just going to avoid or ignore the things that he's being told. Whereas Frank, he seems to be, I guess you could say he's a little bit on the aggressive side, because he knows what the position entails and he feels that it should be done a certain way. And so he's kind of aggressively pushing that position.
I think also that Frank, that's the competition with the aggressive side. And I think that Shannon is trying to do more compromise, is what she wants to have happen.
It almost seems like she wants the two of them to work it out, as opposed to coming to her and having her make the final decision.
Right. Well, and that's the last part of like with the systems idea, like the stuff that I was reading about it is basically, if you're pulled in as the third person in a triangle, your object is to, ask enough questions and get them to talk to where they're working it out between them. And you're just sitting there, more as a facilitator than anything else. And, this is something that you get lots of practice with when you have more than one child. So you get to ask lots of questions and I think it's a good practice for when you have employees or in a workforce situation.
Mine that we read this case that's like 11 pages long, and we see that throughout this process of him being recruited kind of by McDonald, and then all of a sudden 6-7 pages later it says that he doesn't have any allies in the company.
Yeah.
And so it's hard, I guess it's hard for me to see how things went from like her being like super interested in taking a chance on this guy to now, like I said, no allies in the company for him. And so it's interesting to think about what we don't know about him and how.
I don't know. It almost makes you wonder.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did she see her mistake, and now she's hoping that Frank will kind of take care of her mistake for her?
Right.
I know. I feel like he does have allies, because if Frank Davis didn't like him or didn't want him to succeed, he would just let him fail doing the way he was doing, because the way Thomas Green was doing everything, he was bound to fail and he would have got fired. But Frank is putting a lot of time, a lot of effort, and maybe not correctly, but he's putting that time and effort to try to get him on the right page to be successful in that position. If Frank didn't care about him, if Frank didn't care about what was best for business, he would have just let Tom just flap on his own and he would have been cut.
That's very
true. I
true.
Have an ally there. I just don't think Thomas Green saw it that way because of how Shannon presented it. Shannon told him right away, hey, Frank wanted to pick the next person who's going to take over for him. Frank didn't get that, so you might have to watch out for Frank or be aware of that situation. Right there, that puts that 26-year-old, he's really green and wet behind the ears, and that put him in that defensive position right from the beginning. So right there, he did not see Frank as an ally when all this time, and again, this is just my perspective, Frank, I think, was trying to be his biggest ally, was trying to be his mentor. But because of the situation, I don't think Thomas could have saw that.
It's a very good perspective.
I think it goes back to how you phrase things. Our son has autism, and when he was younger, anything with skeletons offset him, anything that was aggressive offset him. So you can imagine trying to take him to the stores and during like Halloween time, anything from like September on was a nightmare. He would melt down because he would see all these things. And so if I had prepped him like, hey, there's going to be a lot of things in the store that are going to be possibly scary, and so you're going to need to like look at other things, it would have just made it even worse, and I think that that's kind of what this is she's like, here's some scary stuff. Whereas I think that instead, if I'm like, okay, well, hey, you're going to want to look at your book while we have to go through this store, and just kind of keep your eyes on your own stuff. You'll feel more comfortable that way, you know. Then he handles it better. So in the same way, if she tells Green, you know, hey, here's some ideas for things that need to happen. If you can focus on these, you're going to adjust a lot more quickly to the job. You know, that just, it helps. So it's just like an open mouth, insert foot situation in the whole thing, I think.
So what do you think can be done? Is there anything that can be done to salvage this? Is there anything Tom can do to salvage this?
There's no doubt. And again, it's just, and I apologize for going back to the book, Crucial Conversations. It's just, as an HR guy, that's like my favorite book in the world. That's like the Bible to me when it comes to HR. But he really needs to take the initiative, sit down with Davis, and just have that conversation saying, hey, this is what I'm observing. This is how it's making me feel. I don't think you want me to feel that way, or you were trying to make me feel that way. Can I please get your insights? And I think that right there will open it up for them to have an honest conversation with each other, get on the same page, and move forward. And I think it's a great way to do it without getting Shannon involved every step of the way.
Yeah. One of the things it asks underneath the application session, it asks about gospel connections. And I've been thinking about Ether 12:27 in this, is, you know, wherefore, and I give men unto weaknesses, or if men come unto me, I will show them their weaknesses. I give men weaknesses that they basically can make those things become strong, is the gist of the scripture. And so turning to Heavenly Father and saying, okay, what are my weaknesses in this? How can I change this? How can I make this better? Would be a huge thing for him to be able to do, or for any of us if we find ourselves in that situation of, okay, show me my weaknesses. It's not fun to see showing your weaknesses by any means, but it's the only way that you can eliminate so many horrible situations where you're like feeling negative all the time, you know?
Yeah, we have to go and show that we are willing to learn and that we are like meek, I think.
Yeah.
Because if Green will just go and talk to Davis, like Garrett said, and just say, hey, I think I can be really good at this. Just show me the ropes. And I'm willing to go out on a limb here, and I'm willing to make mistakes. And I'm willing to work through my mistakes, but just help me become strong at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. As of right now, the ball is in his court, because Shannon has sent him an email and said, hey, I need some answers. And I think now at this point, the best thing he could do would be to sit down and kind of take an inventory of himself and set some goals as to what he can do to improve the situation. And like you said, go sit down with Frank and go over the goals that he has. Even ask him, hey, can you help me accomplish some of these goals? Because then that lets Frank know that he values his opinion.
Right.
I agree. I think, like in that first evaluation, he wrote up a memo Frank did to Tom, and they were supposed to meet again back in like mid-November to go over like his progress. Well, they didn't meet again till the end of January. So therein lies, and the whole time, then Tom was just avoiding him like the plague because he didn't want to deal with him. Right. So I think there's some culpability on both their parts, but I think it would be smart for Green or Davis, either one of them, to take the leadership role in this and come together and say, you know, I think Green, or not Green, but Davis should have given him and said, you know what, let me mentor you on your first couple outings to sales. You know what, let me go with you. Let me show you the ropes. We'll set up a PowerPoint presentation. I'll show you the system or how I've done it, or I'll put you with this person on the first couple. I'd like you to team with them when they go out, so you understand kind of what I'm expecting. So that way it's kind of clear. And then I think, and I think they can still do this. I think that should be the approach. I think even Davis could go to Green and say, you know what, we have really had some miscommunications on both our parts. I think what we need to do is, you know what, we need to talk openly, clearly. We need to come to some understanding. These are the expectations that I would like to see. do you have any questions, or do you see some expectations that you don't think fit, and why is that, and how can, come together on some mutual expectations of the job, and then move forward as a basis for communication there forward.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you the rest of the story. So
before you do, Stephen,
yes.
He's trying to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And before you do that, let's just go down one more road. I think one of the other prompts here is, are there any connections between this case and this week's reading assignment?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's really valuable just to spend a few minutes in that spot. And so given this week's reading assignment, this paradigm of interdependence and win-win, what jumps out at you that's relevant to this discussion?
I feel that Davis feels that things need to be done his way. I feel Thomas feels things need to be done his way, and they're missing that third part, the win-win situation. They're missing. It doesn't always have to be done Davis's way because, well, Shannon wants new ideas. She wants new blood into this. And I believe Thomas just needs to learn how things are done in the position just to get that foundation in. So I think there is the opportunity for a compromise to get that win-win without Davis being totally right or without Thomas being totally right.
But I think the first thing that was missing is trust and respect. There's no emotional bucket for either one of them to draw from. I mean, to even begin with the win-win interdependence there, because they don't have it. It's not even established. So I think they have to go back to trying to get to that building a trust and building a relationship and expectation, so then they can start working on a win-win for both of them. I mean, that P and PC balance, there's no P and PC balance for either one.
Yes.
My thought.
I totally agree. Sometimes when you have a situation like this, it's really easy to look at it and just feel like it's going to be a fail situation. And, I think that's kind of how they've looked at it. So it'll be good to see if they can actually pull through.
Well, they're not looking.
Go ahead.
Sorry, they're not looking at the problem as an opportunity to bond together and build the relationship. They're looking at it as a problem, and both of them are dealing with their own. They just see it through their lens and not through the other person's perspective.
Right.
So they haven't tried to do that yet, I don't think. And that's part of what's missing.
Neither one of them wants to flinch. They don't want the other one to be right. So they're both going to stand their ground and say, this is my position and I'm sticking to my position. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm not going to come over to your side.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Let's see here.
Let me make one more comment before we go off that. And I think you guys are right on target here. Covey talks about these 6 deposits you can make that help the emotional bank account. And certainly one of those 6 is apologizing sincerely when you make a withdrawal.
Yes.
And I'm just going to share you my perspective on this, that Shannon recognized what she'd done and set the example by apologizing to both Frank and Green for not including Frank and kind of putting Green in a position where a lot of this stuff could happen. I just think this could have turned out so much differently than it did. Just that simple thing of recognizing your error, apologizing for it, and starting the process that Michelle talked about of, okay, we blew it on the trust thing here. Let's start again and let's back up the truck and see if we can, we can move forward in a more productive way. So,
yep.
That's a good point.
Gospel principles of, judging and forgiving, pride, all those things are in there. So.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So at this point, McDonald sends him an email on February 5th, and Green takes offense against his boss. He crafts a series of memorandums, emails, and reports and projections that exposed inaccuracies and creative forecasting. The data enabled Green to build some alliances with other marketing personnel who used the data to ultimately side with him. On April 4th, it was announced that Frank was being moved laterally to an undefined special project. However, Green's tactics were seen as overly brutal by many in the company, and although he won the battle against his boss, his career was irreparably harmed. So McDonald distanced herself from him, and by July of 2008, Green announced he was resigning from his position to pursue full-time studies for an MBA. So we can only speculate what would have occurred if Green had tried to work with Davis on this, but unfortunately he took personal offense, and it ended his career and possibly really damaged Frank's career as well. We don't know where Frank went, but it looks like he was moved off to some special project, so I guess he went off into the unknown.
Yeah, the thing with that, it is too bad. The thing with that is, don't burn bridges, because
Absolutely.
it's a small world and you never know who you're going to end up working with again. And I think that he probably burned some bridges there that he could have had some great relationships with, and even if he had decided to go back to have his MBA, he would have come out of that with some allies instead of negative recommendations. So it's unfortunate when people want to take offense, and I always tell my kids, don't take offense, they're too heavy to carry.
That's a good one. I like
Thanks.
Nice.
Anyway.
And the thing is if you don't burn bridges, that means you have a good network. So you can use that network for good for later on, whether it be for yourself or for somebody else. I went and did some service yesterday, and one of the guys that I was working with in our ward, his wife is from the Philippines, and she has a huge network of people that she interacts with, and she was able to find a job for someone over in the Philippines because of the network that she had. It wasn't somebody who was directly related to her that she got. Basically, it was her brother who was out of a job and he needed a job, so she used her network to get him a job. And that just goes back to, if you burn bridges, then it's going to make it really hard to even be able to help others later on.
Yep. All right, we should probably wrap it up.
Yep, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up because it's probably getting late for some of you here. All right, so next week, who is leading next week?
I think it's Mark.
Is it Mark? Mark, are you leading next week?
Lesson 6 next week.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and we'll plan on the same time at 6:30. Does that work for everyone?
7:30 Mountain?
Yeah, sorry, 7:30 Mountain.
Okay.
I'll have to maybe meet someone the night before to figure out how to do all this because I'm computer illiterate.
Yeah.
If you need some help, feel free to reach out, and we'll see if we can help you out with
We'll
that.
stumble through it just like we did before.
Respond on the chat and say, hey,
One of our
you hang on before you get there.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, go ahead and.
What'd he say? What was that, Garrett?
Somehow we always end up getting it to work. So
yes.
That's well.
Okay.
Last week it ended up just recording my screen, and then it only recorded mostly what I was saying. Like it didn't pick up what you guys were saying because of the way that I recorded it. And I kind of thought that might be happening about partway through, so I started like restating half the stuff you guys were saying so that it would actually show up in the recording. So But this week, I'm sure it's done right, because if you see the little button in the top corner that says live, then you've got it right. So.
Awesome.
And I'm your witness as well.
What was that?
He's our witness as well.
Oh, good. That's good. We have a witness. Brother Lamphere, is there anything else for us that you would recommend? Any heads up for things, trends in the class or anything?
No, I think you guys are doing great in your discussions. I would just, if I were to give you maybe one piece of feedback, would be, and there was some of that in there tonight, but just look for opportunities to connect the dots to what you've been reading and being exposed to, you know, and because the relevance is there. And when we get into habit 5 next week, this lesson will really make sense to you when you consider it in the context of that. So yeah, so just kind of connect the dots where you can.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop broadcasting, and you guys should be able to use the link. That.
I think so. Just once you finalize the link through YouTube, then just repost it to our discussion board there, and then
I will do that right now.
The thing.
All right.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Good night.